All right, welcome to episode 5 of the Blackbox Diaries. You might see a few different things. New mic, who dis? All right, it is your hosts, Alex and Chris, and we do have a special guest today going by his elite hacker handle, Red Fire. Um, we will be discussing the usual, which is a few topical news articles this week that we have come across. Obviously, the usual Q&A, some LinkedIn cringe, and we do have obviously the special segment where we will chat to Redfire about all things cyber, getting into cyber, launching your career, and possibly what are some of the interesting threats facing the United States today.
All right, so like Chris said, today we have a very special guest, someone who I have been very close to, very good friends with for about 5 or 6 years now. And he is coming to us from the US Department of Defense on the cyber side, and that is Redfire. So, Redfire, tell us a little bit, or tell the viewers a little bit about, what got you into information technology in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, first off. And I'd say the main thing that got me interested into it was just figuring out that there was like a puzzle I could solve when it came to offensive security type things. I was always just kind of looking for it and never really found it in any other careers, I guess I tried out. Like I actually started as a history major. So when I initially got into college, and quickly realized I wasn't really going anywhere. So no offense to any history majors out there, but yeah.
So when you first got it, So when you first got into college, you're telling me that your goal was to go into like history as an instructor, or what?
Yeah, yeah. It was. I think it was either like I wanted to go into the Marine Corps or I wanted to be a professor of history because I was good at history in high school. So
Sure.
I figured, well, this is the logical course I must be taking. So, yeah, man, that maybe lasted half a semester before I realized probably should switch to a bigger field.
Sure.
So then I switched to computer science.
Curiously, on that then, if history was something that you were really good at, and it's something that you thought was going to be the trajectory of, your career and everything like that, did you apply the same logics of history in learning about, the history of offensive security, the history of cybersecurity, and the history of technology? Did that kind of catapult you a little bit further?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot about like the old school days, quote unquote, about hacking. Read a lot of good books like The Cuckoo's Egg, which is about catching one of the first hackers. I think that was by I can't remember his name right now, but yeah, it was a guy about. He was like, this was like back in the day where you literally printed out the logs of the computers. There was no like screen per se. Yeah,
Back in the day.
yeah. Back in the day, where computers were like the size of the room I'm in right now, or something.
Back when Alex was a teenager.
Yeah, Jesus was a corporal.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other one that was more offensive security and that I really liked was Sandworm by Andy Greenberg. A little more updated, obviously. It talked about, Russia and all their APTs that they've been, utilizing throughout the past couple of years, especially against Ukraine, things like that.
So you got to college. History was a thing, and you eventually identified that information technology or computer science specifically was the route to take. So you got to computer science, and what? Like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, a lot of people that go into cyber initially, they have a focus on the defense because that's kind of what the industry says is the money maker, right? Oh, if you want to make good money, go cybersecurity. And that, while that's factual, it's kind of interesting because the offensive side kind of most oftentimes has kind of a type A personality ish, right? Would you say that kind of was a personality trait of yours?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I certainly recognize there is a common characteristic when meeting with some more offensive focused people that like you could just kind of tell like, okay, yeah, you were almost born for this, or this makes sense with your personality. You know, it lines up. So
Sure.
yeah, there's definitely a certain type of person that you have to be willing to bang your head against the same wall 10 times for the next 3 weeks or whatever, because you can't get past whatever thing you're trying to hack into. So it does
100%.
takes
Yeah.
that type of person for sure.
So that makes a lot of sense, and our viewers probably agree if they've gotten their OSCP or
Oh
are
yeah.
working towards it. So on that note, I know you somewhat recently achieved your OSCP. I think was it within the last year?
Yeah, November 2023,
Oh, okay. So it was November.
a couple months ago. Yeah.
So kind of walk me through your journey to the OSCP, why you wanted it, what was the process of achieving it like, and if you could kind of push it in a way that the viewers can kind of put into practice,
Gotcha.
right? Because I know you nailed that beast first time go, and me personally, it took me 3 attempts. So go ahead. What do you got?
Yeah, sure. Well, I got to credit you a lot with that actually, because I don't even think I knew it existed until you did a presentation at our cyber club, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this guy Alex exists. Okay, I should go talk to him." Yeah, and then we just started, hitting boxes like a couple of days a week, a lot of late nights, but it was still fun. And
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I learned through like starting to, because I didn't even know what like an Nmap scan was or whatever at the
Sure.
beginning, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
the biggest thing was, well, two things really: a lot of videos, a lot of YouTube videos, not really understanding what's going on, but just taking in that information, so that
Sure.
eventually when I do understand what's going on, then I'll be like, oh, that's what he meant
Yeah.
we're doing an LFI or whatever. But yeah, the other thing is learning the hard way for sure, because a lot of scenarios where I could have like taken a hint, or you could like look up the box and see the walkthrough, whatever, but
Sure.
you just want to solve it so bad, and you literally learn the hard way. Like there's some obscure tool you never heard of that you just have to Google and find. There's tools that you never even heard of, like Burp Suite. I still remember how I learned Burp Suite, because I was like, I think it was a local file inclusion vulnerability on this one Hack the Box machine, and I was like, there's got to be a way I can like resend this request without manually filling everything out again. And I just
Sure.
looked it up, and I just found a Burp Suite, tool. So if I had looked up a tutorial, I probably wouldn't have remembered how to use a tool as well. Well, I'm sure I
Okay.
wouldn't have, versus actually doing it, quote unquote, the hard way, and like finding the tool myself, learning about the tool myself, things like that.
Okay.
And then just repetition. I mean, I was hitting probably, I actually had there's a great list. If you Google TJ Knowles OSCP prep, there's all those boxes on there.
Yes, I've actually been on there. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. That was like I'm a big list guy, so that was my list of just going down those boxes, and just trying to hit them all without using any hints and taking notes. That's a big thing too. I do not like documentation, but I did force myself to write down a lot of things, so that I was able to, especially in the exam, I could just copy and paste commands, so I don't not
Yep.
wasting time.
Yep.
100%. That's the best way.
Yeah, definitely.
Chris preaches a lot. Google is probably the best hacking tool to ever exist.
That's a
And
good.
when it comes to these things, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like,
Yeah.
When I went through my OSCP journey, personally, for me, a lot of, when you're doing those machines, you go to look for an exploit, or you go to look for an attack path, or, a proof of concept or something like that. It exists already. And the majority of the stuff that you really need to do, like you quite often don't need to write your own exploit, although there is value in doing that 100%. I believe there's value in learning to do that. But if you're looking to do something like that, usually it's just fixing somebody else's code, to be honest.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you don't have to be the best programmer. You just have to know what their code is doing and what it's not doing to achieve your objective.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They're not asking for 0 days, you know. Yeah.
No,
That was-
exactly. But I guess just to bounce off that question chain, you know, obviously the preparation is key and everything like that. You know, I went through the OSCP, read a whole bunch of preparation things, even things were like, make sure you eat lots of fruit and bananas and sleep the night before very well, and drink water and hydrate, and don't drink as much coffee because it doesn't make you think clear. All this random stuff. And, you know, I'm pretty sure I was eating M&Ms and Skittles and slamming coffee and I was sweet as. But I mean, realistically, I think the hardest part for me, and I think the part that a lot of people struggle with, you know, I have a friend who just went through the OSCP Journey. His first attempt, it didn't quite work out for him. But I remember, you know, there is like quite a big period of anxiety generation when you get up to that point of like, oh, my lab time is ending and I now need to, you know, do this thing that's going to be my exam. And I'm, you know, I don't know how I'm going to approach it or if I'm actually ready. Like, you know, I guess my question to you is, at what point did you think you were ready for it, and what was the turning point for you?
That is a fantastic question. I'm actually looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah. So going back to that, you made a good point actually about like the what is it, 90 days, I think, of lab time you get running out, and that kind of anxiety that came with it. I tried to help myself mitigate that by, I literally just had another list actually, but I listed out all the modules in the labs. I just wrote a date of when I project to complete them. And then the harder ones would take maybe 3 or 4 days, whatever. And then I bought the exam day. I bought the exam like schedule, or when I scheduled the exam the day I bought the lab access. So I forced myself to,
smart,
you know, like, hey, this is going to happen on this day. So, you know, you can't slack. You can't wait a week and then get started. But yeah, so when I felt ready, I'm not sure I ever really did, to be honest, because to me, I was like, well, there was always something more I could do, or I could have always found something faster, or, you know, things like that. And I don't think I helped myself, but I usually went to there's this Reddit, what's it called? Subreddit r/OSCP. I went on there a lot because a lot of people, I think it's an okay resource because a lot of people post like their war stories kind of how the exam went and stuff like that. So some people, whenever I read a good exam experience, I was like, oh, great, I can do this. This guy seemed like he had an easy one. And then some people are like, I got 0 points in 24 hours. I couldn't even touch you know. So, yeah. As far as the turning point, though, I mean, I never felt ready, like I said, but the turning point when I started to feel like, okay, I'm going to get some points at least. I know that was probably the second set of OSCP. They give you 3 mock exams that you can do with the lab setup. For anyone who doesn't know, so I think the second set of mock exams that they gave me, I pretty much breezed through it. I'm not sure I actually used a hint or anything. Maybe 1 or 2 questions in the Discord that bumped me along the way. That's another great resource too, the OffSec Discord. Yeah. So after I did that, and I did a mock report too for each of the exams, because that was my big thing. Another kind of anxiety point was like, I'm not good at writing. I don't want to write the exam. I don't want to write my first pen test report during the exam, you know? So made those mock exams, and yeah, I mean, that was kind of the turning point, like I said, where I was like, it was relatively easy for me to do, or at least I was able to get through it with not a lot of help. So I was like, okay, cool. I have a chance. I might actually be able to do this.
Sure. When you were doing the 90 days labs, I know OffSec, and we're going to have an OffSec representative on the podcast, so this will actually be a good question for. Okay, so you're aware that they have a giant lesson outline, right? And you have a percentage of those lessons completed.
Yep.
And I'm curious, what do you remember what percentage you actually finished of those lessons before you took your exam?
Yes, I believe I did. I want to say I was in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because because I needed the what's it called? You get the extra credit if you complete.
Oh, yeah.
a certain number.
80%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think I was obviously shooting for 80% and like 30 hashes. I think that needed to be submitted.
Yeah.
But I also was just like, I'm going to go through all the modules anyway. So yeah, I think I got the solid 80% and then 90% just kind of with the little. There's some modules that aren't the most helpful, but they're still good to know. Like,
sure,
the intro. What is cybersecurity? It tells you about like the CIA triad stuff. Like, they're not going to ask you that on the exam, but it's still a good read through, whatever, and it adds to your completion percentage. So,
I think maybe that's why it took me 3 times to finish, because I think I only got like 30% of the lessons.
I see, yeah.
Well, like the OSCP is an awesome program, and I think it's awesome because I'm a hands-on guy. I need to do things in order to understand and remember how they work.
Right.
And I'm very standoffish or averse to long lesson plans where I have to open this next machine, try this, and then once that's done, open this next. It kind of made me like, gross. But it's an awesome lesson setup. But just for people like me, it's very difficult. So I tore through those freaking labs like nobody's business. And finally on attempt number 3 I smoked it. But that's awesome. I'm really glad that we had you on, because you did the right thing.
Yeah.
and I think that probably would have helped me in the end.
Yeah, to me it was always like OffSec makes the exam, so I want to use OffSec's training materials.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Pretty much for any course, really, that generally makes sense. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, works for another vendor who does similar exams. And he was explaining to me that there are services out there that they had caught somebody using like a cheat service. They bought basically the exam, like the report from this particular service. And obviously when they're marking those exams, they can obviously see that it's from this cheat website, but obviously the people who buy that, they don't know that. They think they're being swift, but obviously also forgetting the industry that they're trying to get into, obviously. So I think you're only really cheating yourself, to be honest. And I believe the last I heard was from that platform, since they know that that person's since been lifetime banned from that platform. Which they should be for that. I guess I had a couple of questions. Really, one kind of more about the OSCP, and then one is a bit of a segue. The one about the OSCP, I guess somebody who passed it recently, what would be your top 3 tips for somebody out there who wants to do this certification?
Yeah, I'd say my first one was. It was a big financial commitment, so I would recommend starting with Providing Grounds. I believe the paid version is Providing Grounds Play, if I'm not wrong, or it could be Practice.
Proving Grounds Play?
Yeah, Proving Grounds.
I know that's the free one, and then I think the Proving Grounds Practice is like $30 a month, or something close to it.
Yeah. It's a great resource, honestly, because it goes back to the same thing where like OffSec made it, so it's probably going to be similar to the OffSec exam. I think if you pay for the year, it's like $200 for the whole year. So it's a good, for me at least, it was a good resource to build up confidence before I step into the domain of the OSCP. I guess that would be my first tip. Start small, unless you're really enthused, and go for it, I guess. But
sure,
I think it's like $1,500, so just make sure you're ready. let's see. And then I think the other thing would be commitment. Just like a steady, you can't realize a week before the exam starts that you haven't touched a single module, and you try to blast through every single one. Maybe some people, but not me. So, just like it's gonna take, you have 90 days, right? So for 90 days at max, you'd have to pretty much get on. I try to get on every single day, except there's like a period of 2 weeks, I think, where like there's a little bit of burnout. But besides that, yeah, every single day get on and just touch a machine at some point somewhere, just to get that experience, and what's it called, muscle memory in your fingers, I guess. And then the third one, let's see, I guess it would be, probably just the OSCP jitters. I had my own fair share of that. But, you kind of just got to realize, like, well, you're here, you're taking the exam, just do what you know.
Sure.
Because assuming you've done all the prep, you know everything you need to know. So don't let it don't make it bigger than it is, in terms of, like, oh, this huge exam, what if I fail? What if, whatever. But, you haven't even taken the exam yet, so why are you going through the hypotheticals?
That's a good point, and I think that's one of those things. I was having a conversation with somebody about this the other day. When it comes to these types of exams, we know that they're, substantial, they're time consuming, they're stressful and everything like that, but we really do hype them up. And I think if you just know your stuff, right, and you put the time in and you put the effort in, you've put the hours in, you really need to just back yourself. And this is an industry that once you get that certification, that becomes even more important, to be able to back yourself and say, like, I know this, I can do this on this engagement, I can do this for this client. Like, stop second guessing yourself. Obviously, you don't have to go and bang out a client's network in 24 hours, right? But, you have obviously a lot more time to play around and grow. But I think the important part that a lot of people also need to realize is it's really just the beginning of the journey, which I guess brings me to my next question for you to kind of segue out of the OSCP stuff is, do you feel that once you got the certification, that it opened doors for you? And do you think that it also led you to the role that you have now?
Yes to both, actually. Yeah. So there's a lot more, like almost every single job description, honestly, that I look for that's even in the realm of pen testing or offensive security focused, it has OSCP as like a basic requirement pretty much. So I'd say it definitely helps. One, it helps your confidence. Me personally, I think when you're in interviews and you can say that you've done something like that, because, what they're called, recruiters know that exam, they know its difficulty, and the ability for you to say that you passed is a big help for opening up doors if you are interested in getting into that space. And then also in my job, I'd say it doesn't apply directly to what I do right now, but it definitely is. It's still a good kind of a checkbox of, like, do you have any security-based certifications? And it also shows, and you can make this on your resume too, show that this is like something you do for fun. This is an extracurricular activity that, like, even in your free time, you're focused on cyber. You're not focused on whatever, watching YouTube all day or
sure.
So
it's incredibly important for, especially for those viewers out there that are, trying to actually, get themselves hired, maybe on LinkedIn or some other outlet. Your ability to execute cyber is awesome, and that will probably help you a tremendous amount. But I think when I'm looking for an employee or an operator to do, things in cyber, whether it be offensive or defensive, I really want to know that they have a passion. And I think that one of the biggest reasons I got hired with the company that I currently work for is most likely because I brought that up. When I'm not hacking for you, I'm hacking for me. You know what I mean? And not in an illegal sense, right? Viewers, relax. Um, but doing it because you have a love or a passion for the art that is hacking. So that's awesome to hear.
All right, and I guess just a couple more questions. I guess non-OSCP related. However, having a security certification like that, and you've obviously looked at different exploits and attack techniques and things that will affect different technologies and modern technologies and whatnot, given your OSCP was recently. What do you think some of the top cyber threats that are focused on impacting the United States or maybe globally in today's market?
Yeah, based on what I've seen, just me personally thinking, reading the news, stuff like that, and also more of CISA's outputs, I think it's definitely China is our biggest headache right now, I guess you could call them. They're very, very sophisticated in terms of everything that they do, tradecraft, and their ability to think very long term and get students over here that study in American universities and get American jobs and in the DoD or wherever, and then come back over to China with a lot of what's basically amounts to corporate espionage. What they're very good at that, stealing all of our good ideas.
Of course.
Yeah, and then and this is super highlighted with like Russia, Ukraine right now, but Russia cyber is another, I guess, the second biggest threat up there. They're also, again, sophistication is the same thing. And I've mentioned CSAs or cybersecurity advisories. Those are big. Those really get into the nitty gritty of those APTs that you hear about, or advanced persistent threats. But yeah, if you go back and read them, you can see how they've gotten a lot more advanced, especially recently, right after COVID. I guess you could say was the big cutoff point because everyone was home, so they were all just typing away, I guess, at their computers.
Right. True, and I guess I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here because it's an interesting topic that I read about recently, but it's something I've been meaning to discuss even with Alex as well.
Yeah.
Globally, financially and global economics and things like that, the cost of living globally is a little bit crazy after COVID.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that has come out as, a major cyber threat recently is actual cybersecurity professionals and like coders, developers, and things like that are also offering their services, on the dark web and for these, APTs, but, essentially stateside to help create advanced pieces of malware or improve their code so it can be obfuscated better or polymorph better or whatever they need to do. What's your view on that emerging threat?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Because one, I don't know why anyone would try to sell malware in the United States, kind of asking for it at that point, asking me thrown in jail. But I think the more interesting thing is how it's become like almost like its own level of it's become a business almost. Like you can sell the malware, but then you provide almost like IT help desk support to troubleshoot it.
Yeah.
And it's like it seems almost like a legitimate business basically, because they provide the support, like maybe updates to the malware, or they have some sort of like consistent communication where it comes off as a legitimate service that they're offering.
Sure. I know there's
100%.
groups like that Null Bulge. They have a website and everything.
Yeah,
true. That's true. But it goes back to, one of the things we've talked about previously, Alex, like the phishing as a service and things like that, and malware as a service, these platforms that are actually cheaper in some instances than buying a corporate solution, it is quite often cheaper to buy, the malicious version.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple sites out there. I won't name them directly on here, but I know a lot of them, the currency utilized to pay is in Bitcoin stuff, with the hopes that, the transaction can't be followed or whatever. I think there's ways to do that. I think even the OffSec Labs at times can kind of take you down that route. But I think Hack the Box does that as well. So
yeah, I think it's definitely something we need to be more mindful of. But I think it also highlights that, in the hiring process and, obviously the checking process when you're hiring, IT professionals these days, it's something that we need to be paying attention to and making sure that, kind of bringing on somebody who's also just a malware developer in their spare time. All right. And that brings us to the end of that section of our podcast today. Thank you so much, Redfire, for joining us and talking about your OSCP journey and some of the current threats that are impacting the United States and also globally in the cyber industry. Did you want to say any parting words before you leave?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me on, guys. And if you're interested, or if anyone out there is interested in checking out more content that I have, I do have a YouTube channel. It's just Redfire359. And thank you for the platform today.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. It was a pleasure having you. Really enjoyed the conversation. It was really interesting hearing a very recent version of the OSCP journey and obviously awesome dude to talk to. So, really appreciate you joining us today.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Faux show. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so welcome back. That was a fantastic discussion with old Redfire. Next, we are going to move on to a very, Chris, you're going to love this. You're going to freaking love it. Cool. So 2 days ago, Daily Dark Web pushed out an article on 30 new ransomware that were detected by malware researchers in July of 2024. And it just so happens, Chris, that one of our favorite hacker groups looks like it created its own malware, and it is No Bulge. So it looks like they kept the name for the malware. So that leads me into this next discussion, which I'm going to kind of ask for a lot of information from you because you're very well versed. SiegeSec, released by cyberdaily.au, SiegeSec Hacking Collective, disbands after breaching the US Heritage Foundation. So, relax. That's just where it begins. So, days after announcing it had successfully hacked the Heritage Foundation, a conservative US think tank responsible for Project 2025, which, for those of you who are not aware, that is a gigantic plan that the conservative side of the House of Representatives and White House possible representation will kind of have for their plans of the next 4 years if they're elected. However, in between announcing, this is good, in between announcing the hack and today's disbanding announcement, SiegeSec has not only gotten a lot of press, but anyone who identifies as a quote-unquote gay furry hacker will look good in a headline, but it also got into an online argument with the Heritage Foundation's executive director, Mr. Mike Howell. Chris?
Look, it's an interesting one. There's a lot that goes into this. I guess, it's quite a sensitive topic in the context of 2024 and the world and where that's going and free speech and all those types of things. I think going back a number of years, like one of the things that was a very common and significant thing was, hacktivism, back in the days of Anonymous and whatnot, right? It kind of tapered off after that. And, then we were dealing with, more just malicious type attacks, there were some areas that, Anonymous were like, you could see the logic behind what they were doing and how they were trying to make things better in their own way. Whether that was the right way or the wrong way, that's up to personal interpretation. But realistically, hacktivism was something that was never really on my radar. It was always something that I raised with clients and people I was talking to as a risk, depending on the industry. If you're talking, mining, energy, natural resources, trains, public transport, those types of things that could, impact things like the environment. Also, different kinds of sports that, might get sponsorships from questionable sponsors and things like that, that hacktivism could be a risk, but you never really saw too many active attacks about it, right? But we've now entered a part in 2024, in even parts of 2023 with, the rise of these types of groups and people's identities and equal rights and, this person, that person, all these types of things, and equality and LGBTQI things and everything like that. The world is a little bit malleable in some areas at the moment around, what people consider, should be one thing, what other people consider should be another thing. And when you get to that, type of, I guess, type of culture and type of global direction and openness in both sides of the fence, really, like you have parts of the government that are willing to accept things, parts of the government that are not willing to accept things. You have activist groups, not necessarily hacktivist groups. You have actual activist groups. You have protests, whether it's protests against, oil or whatever they're protesting against, or the environment. You now have, obviously, also this particular community, and, in relation to this article, like furry communities and LGBTQI communities and things like that, that also have their own, activist groups and things like that. I guess one of the things is that when it comes to data breaches these days, a lot of the things that are done with tools and skills that are also easily accessible. You can go and watch YouTube videos, you can listen to podcasts, you can study, courses, realistically courses on, pen testing and things like that are not really that expensive compared to like a uni degree, and the time commitment is just a time commitment. If you can bang it out quickly, you can, right? So to go and learn the skills to do these, or at least enough to do some form of harm, is now enabling these hacktivist groups, whether wrong or right. And, again, that's up to personal interpretation, but it is a realistic risk and a realistic threat to organizations and governments today.
It is. It is. And you know what? It's difficult because, I mean, from the black hat perspective, it's they're going in a productive direction, which makes me fearful, right? It's interesting because, normally you would look at, people who develop malware and throw it out on the streets, for malicious purposes, truly in hopes that other groups or other people, even if they're lone wolves, are going to use them to create chaos. And with the inception of all these different, progressive views, listen, they're not progressive views, man. There are a lot of radical views out there, and that's on the left, that's on the right, and it exists in pretty much every country across the globe. And then you have the, normal or, kind of relaxed version of that. But what we're seeing today is, these radical groups, whether you like it or not, the radical groups are starting to utilize cyberspace, kind of like the military is, as a warfighting domain. And now they're like, okay, well, you don't believe in my views. Well, screw you. I'm going to fricking hit your organization with malware. And I hope it creates chaos, because if it doesn't create chaos, it doesn't achieve our objective, which is to create, societal dissension. It's scary to me, Chris, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that, particularly this article that I was reading, I think one of the things that I don't necessarily agree with is that both sides of the fence seem to be hitting each other with, hatred and obviously like ill intent towards each other. There's back and forth from, the US government to say, this and that, and some pretty aggressive and hateful speech, which in turn is really just going to make them an even bigger target. And it's going to, escalate to a point that, it might even be an even bigger data breach. It might be an even bigger attack. It might encourage other groups, like this isn't even the hacktivist group that we've previously discussed, but it might now get them involved, or it might get another one involved, or it might get more people to join this collective of hacktivism, against the US government, because of that hate speech going that way. But at the same time, the retaliation itself can be, a little bit hateful in some way, because, we've talked about it before, that hacktivism doesn't necessarily just impact the person or the organization that you're going after. It can have a ripple effect on, the general community and people who did nothing wrong.
That's a good point, man. That is a good point. And I think on that same, to kind of caveat on it, Redfire earlier was talking about China, as a problem, which we all pretty much know that, right? Seeing that in the news and such. If I was the adversary against a country like the United States, I think you're right. The main issue would probably not be these quote unquote hacktivist or activist groups, but they would really just be a precursor to my goals. If I was that, straight line thinking adversary, I would utilize that kind of like in a triple D methodology where you deploy, disorganize, and then destroy. So you're disorganizing a nation state by kind of driving that societal dissension. And then once the country's focused on something completely different, that may be the opportune time to execute an attack. So good points made, Chris.
Exactly. And I think, even in some cases, adversaries could launch their own attacks that use similar techniques as the hacktivists, or even pose as the hacktivists. And, the real threat is not there, or they could leverage the chaos created from this situation to launch other attacks that are not going to be detected because the attention's diverted over here.
Precisely. Okay, Chris, so the next topic that we are going to discuss, and I'm going to ask for your expert advice, is a recent article from darkreading.com, and it is on Russia's fighting URSA. APT uses car ads to install headlace malware, so a group also known as APT 28. So a prolific Russian threat actor known as Fighting URSA is targeting diplomats through a used car sale email scheme that then distributes headlace backdoor malware. What do you got?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And, we touched on ads last week with Jai as well, particularly the Google ads and obviously the malicious versions of those. And it is something that, we all see every day, right? You're cruising Facebook, you're cruising Instagram. It's like, buy these shoes at a ridiculously discounted price, buy this makeup at a ridiculously discounted price. Obviously, sometimes we know when it comes to consumerism and things like that, often if it's too good to be true, it usually is, and there's something that's kind of sus in the back end about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, particularly here from what I saw, it involves downloading a zip file. So, I mean, that's kind of flag number one, right? If it requires you to do that. From that perspective, I think once you get to that point and you install it and you get through that and then you're being compromised, it's pretty much on you. I mean, there's enough out there these days that you can say, well, that's probably not a good idea. That's probably not a legitimate website. Why is it asking me to download this? Why is it asking me to do that? There's a lot of questions that go into this. I think, particularly when it comes to things like cars and things where people are actually looking for good deals. And obviously it says here for diplomats. And I think what I read when I was having a look into it was things like Audi and, kind of like luxury cars. So when you're targeting diplomats and you're kind of stroking that, diplomat ego to an extent of wanting to drive, the fancy cars. I see a lot of them around Australia, diplomats cruising around in fancy cars. It is a pretty easy way to target them. So, I mean, it kind of goes back to, the governments and everything where the diplomats are working to making sure that as possibly as part of the diplomat program and as part of, these representative programs, they're getting the appropriate level of cybersecurity education as well that they particularly need to make sure that they're not doing the wrong thing.
Fair.
What do you think?
Are they listening? I think it goes through one ear and out the other. And the diplomats, I believe that I think that most diplomats, quote unquote, depending on what nation they're from, I think they're generally older individuals, right? I'm not going to sit here and say they're all 75, but I do believe that the vast majority is older and came from a different time. Like for instance, my father, right, always falls victim and ended up giving me remote access to his system so that I can monitor and make sure that things that he downloads or emails that he receives are legitimate before he goes and starts clicking on them, because most of those emails look attractive to him because he's not well versed. So not only are there's diplomats probably in another age group that maybe didn't get brought up in this kind of environment, but they also don't know a whole lot about cyberspace at all. So one thing I would like to do for our viewers that may not understand exactly what we're talking about here, I'm going to walk them through what the attack chain looks like as per this article. And I can offer you some insight because I've utilized a lot of remote access Trojans in my day. With the cyber attack routine, the attack chain begins with the use of a legitimate free service known as a webhook, right? That goes without saying. We can use things like, what's that one, Chris? I can't remember it right off the top of my head. Grok? Or ngrok, right? So that's one way. And then that's a tactic that Unit 42 noted is often associated with APT28. And to be honest with you, it's often associated with most threat actors. The page that the victim is led to determines if the target machine is running Windows, Linux, whatever. And then if it's a zip archive is offered for download. So what that means is that they are focusing their attacks on Windows machines, because why most malware we create is based on Windows, because most large-scale organizations, if not, I mean, like legit, the vast majority are running on a Windows network. Maybe it's an Active Directory, or even some local businesses or small businesses still run Windows at their location. Why? Because it's easy. So it drops that zip archive, which generally has 3 files, a Windows calculator executable, right? An actual executable. And this is funny that we're reading this, Chris, because Jai brought up this exact methodology. It's disguised as an image file, a malicious dynamic link library, or DLL, and a batch script. So that's that 3 that Jai was talking about, which executes the malware. The calculator executable is used to load the malicious DLL, which then runs the batch script. From there, it executes a command to retrieve a file from another. I mean, it can do anything. So for those of you who are listening to this, and I know I've rambled on a lot, if you receive a zip file via email from an unknown source, dude, don't touch that. Don't touch it. Report it if you're at a place or a professional place of work, or delete it immediately.
Yeah, similarly, if a website downloads or initiates a download of a file that you weren't expecting a download to happen, it's not really common for you to click on an ad or something similar and then something to be downloading onto your system, as you would probably know or experience in other ads. So yeah, just be careful out there, I reckon.
Good. Okay, so here we go, Chris. We have reached our final focus topic of the day, and that is another article from cyberdaily.au, and that is an exclusive which it looks like released on 6 August, so again, recent. Australian furniture retailer early settler confirms data breach. You know anything about this, Chris?
All right, so I don't know too much about this attack, just that obviously they have a bunch of data that's been taken. They have obviously significant data breach. The data is being sold for, or was advertised to be sold for, about $2 million. It obviously has a lot of data there. I think what this highlights is it doesn't really matter if you're a retailer or if you're a furniture store or anything like that. You know, I know Early Settler because I have some of their pieces of furniture around our house. Like, we would consider them maybe a little bit more of an upmarket furniture shop, a little bit more chic in what they offer, a little bit more bespoke. So I think what they would usually think from their perspective is, you know, we're a retailer, we're a furniture store. A cyber attack's not really going to mean too much to us, you know. But I think that comes down to them not really actually understanding the data that they hold and the data that they process. Because, you know, I don't know how it is in the US, but I know here when I've bought furniture before, they take, you know, driver's license, first name, last name, phone number, address, obviously for delivery, all that type of stuff. They take even, credit card. Yeah. They take even more if you're actually not using a credit card, for example. They take even more if you're going to finance through that company. Like, so if you say, I want to finance it, they take even more, like credit ratings and all sorts of stuff that they have and hold on you that, you know, could be valuable to an attacker. It could be valuable to a threat actor. And I think this highlights it doesn't really matter what your business is or what industry you work in. Like, nobody's really safe here. I think this is, you know, a potentially big one for this particular organization. I know that they have a bunch of different shops obviously spotted throughout Australia, but I'm not 100% sure on the angle that they have, you know, from a cyber insurance perspective, or what's really going to happen here for them, or how they're really kind of dealing with that to recover from a data breach like this. And it doesn't look like, you know, anything has really too much happened yet. Again, though, I will say it does look like it was third-party related, which, you know, we bang on about that a lot, particularly over the past couple of episodes, that third parties are a massive, massive risk to every organization. So you really need to make sure that your third-party risk management is, you know, is really well looked after. It is really well considered, and, you know, you are putting appropriate controls in place, and, you know, holding your third parties, your partners, your vendors, and everything like that to account. Like, what do you think, Alex, on that?
I'm glad you said. So a lot of companies, and this is big in the US, a lot of companies really fail in this area. And that is, okay, a hacker's going to attack my company. Why? And the only thing that comes to mind for them is their local assets, right? And what they fail to understand is it's not their local assets that are targeted. In some cases they are, but most of the time it's not. It is your customers. It is the consumer's assets that the attackers are actually after, because that's where they're going to be able to hold you ransom, because now it's not just about, you know, your local assets. Now it's about your consumers or your stakeholders, right? And you hit the nail on the head saying, you know, it doesn't matter what kind of business you are absolutely a target to this kind of attack.
Yeah, 100%, you know. And I mean, another thing I did notice with them is that it's obviously data from a little while ago, so like 2022 as well. So I think there's an important thing that needs to be noted, that you really need to understand your data. You really need to understand, you know, your archiving. You need to understand the classification of the data. You need to understand what you have, where it is, who has access to it. All of these things are really, really important things that need to be implemented in an organization to make sure that data is appropriately secured and locked down. And I think that, you know, some organizations really struggle with it, and some organizations just don't think it's that important.
I agree. I freaking agree.
All right, beautiful listeners and viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, we have come to the time of community questions, the part of the show where either I ask Alex the community questions or he asks them of me. Today, you lucky people have me asking the question. And the questions that we have are a little bit interesting. We have a couple that are on pen testing and a couple that are on more governance-y leadership type stuff, the boring side. So we'll get into that and we'll see what Alex's view is on it, and I'll maybe throw my 2 cents in as well. So the first question I have for you, Alex, is what do you think of the proposed AI penetration testing automation push and the sales pitches associated with this?
Dan, man, that's a really good question. Listen, I think I brought this up in one of our other episodes, but AI, guys, guys and gals, you're not getting away from it, right? A lot of people are anti-AI because they're like, oh, it's cheating, or oh, this, that, and the other, or oh, it's dangerous, it's going to take over civilization. Listen, that may be true, right? You may not be wrong. But what I will tell you is this: it's coming. And I think a lot of cybersecurity organizations, specifically, I can accurately speak about the one I work for. We are actively pushing to try and develop an avenue of approach to utilizing artificial intelligence in automated scanning as a possible precursor to manual scanning. Whereas, normally we'll conduct our manual scan against a target, and then if we don't find anything, generally follow that up with a Nessus scan. AI will be much different. AI, in my opinion, will probably be capable of not only identifying current malware or current, vulnerabilities within a network's architecture or within system architecture, but probably predetermine whether things could eventually become a vulnerability in the future. So that's where I sit with AI. I think there's going to be a heavier push, and people are competing right now to make that money.
Sure. I think if we go back like a number of years, and I think I've said this before, when you look at, we had vulnerability assessments and then we had penetration tests, and the penetration test was the cream of the crop, right? Is what we were pushing clients to do, is what we were pushing to do internally. And vulnerability scans and vulnerability assessments were kind of that part that you take the cheaper option and the cheaper way out, right? We live in a world now where pen tests are now kind of that vulnerability assessment piece, because now we're pushing for red teams, adversary simulations, purple team exercises, those types of things. Sure. That AI does have its place here, because pen testing in itself has become very scope limited. Like you have somebody says, oh, I need a pen test, but it needs to be just this web application, right? That's not really showing you the full threat profile of that organization. It's just really testing the security of that one web application, but they might have 10 others that are completely vulnerable, and that's what an attacker is going to see. But you can give them the green check that says that website is sweet, right? So they can provide that to the board or whatever, whoever's asking that particular question. I think using AI solutions that are going to go out and you can test probably faster, you can test more, you can test in a more efficient way, and generate reports that are going to be generally pretty well written, that require less manual input from that. I think it's going to be a valuable tool, but I think the important thing to take out of that and to recognize is it's a tool. At the moment, it's not quite there to fully replace a dedicated penetration tester to come and do the work for you. And realistically, even the output of that tool and those tools in some instances is still going to require somebody like yourself, Alex, to interpret those results and communicate that to the business. I think it definitely has its place in a toolkit, but I think, it's like a car, right? A car is a tool, still needs a driver.
That's fair. I totally agree with you. Yeah. 100%.
All right. Well, let's move to question 2 for you, Alex. And this one's going to be interesting for you. And I'm actually really keen to hear what you have to say here. You
should be
talk a
good.
lot about data breaches and things companies should do to secure themselves against this type of attack and security incident. But we are a small business that is just a family business. What should we be doing?
To protect themselves against that?
Yeah, I guess the purpose is, this is like the mums and dads shops, like the
Sure,
bakery
yeah.
down the road. We've spoken about the bigger companies. We've talked about, other companies on here like CrowdStrike, bigger things, all those types of organizations and big corporates that secure themselves with all these big names. But
Sure.
what can the smaller companies is just, your mum and dad owning a bakery do?
Wow, whoever that viewer is, I love you to death. That's a good question and a very appreciated question, because I think we just got done talking about how important it is for really any business to start having a focus on their consumers, and that's still your biggest problem for those small, mom and pop shops, right? Is your first thing, understand that your data is at risk. That's number one. You have to buy into that because it's true. And if you fail to identify any gaps in information flow between yourself, your customers, so on and so forth, you're going to end up failing. So that's a start, understanding what's at risk. Two, even if you're just a baker, right? If you're running your own business, you should probably keep on top of emerging threats. Pay attention to the news. Don't just get caught off guard. Don't end up being that guy or gal or business that gets taken for granted by ransomware and then you lose everything from identity theft. That will ruin you and your business, and many of your consumers will be at risk, and then you'll be sued. You get the idea. So I actually recently had a client of mine for my business personally that is a mom and pop bar, right? It's a bar and grill. Great people, amazing human beings. Never, ever had a vulnerability assessment. I tested the network on site, did an external and internal, and I was successful at both. And for those of you pen testers out there who are watching, you know that is not a good thing, right? Get tests, right? Even if you're a small business, you still need, you probably have the money. It's not going to cost you too much for a small business to get a quick, vulnerability assessment of your network. Ask questions.
Yeah, 100%. I think the important thing to understand is that if you go and Google cybersecurity, or you go and Google who can help me with cybersecurity or cybersecurity companies, a lot of them are going to take into context that, you are a 2-3 person family business, right? And you're going to get scared away from the cost because you don't have $1 million to spend on cybersecurity. You don't have $100,000 to spend on cybersecurity. But if you do start to look around and you start to put the information out there that you need help, somebody will be able to help you. There are a lot of smaller firms. There are a lot of, one-person shops that, they consider themselves just as, small as you, and they have the skills, that are there as well. So there are options out there for you. There's also a lot of free options out there for you. There's a lot of videos, podcasts. There's lots of things that you can do to read and understand how you can secure yourself. But ultimately, my advice to you would be to just start and understand that you're not necessarily immune, but take care of all the fundamentals. Look at your systems, your applications, everything that you use on your phone, everything that you do, multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, double checking everything. Don't click emails that you don't trust. Make sure that, everything is all squared away with all of the fundamentals. You can even Google basic cybersecurity fundamentals, and there'll be a lot of tips out there for you.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Question number 3, Alex.
Yes.
How do we get the IT team to understand that we are not smashing them for doing a bad job? We genuinely want to help secure the business.
So how are they smashing them?
Well, I guess in the context of this would likely be, for example, sometimes as a security team, you can come in, or even as a security auditor or the security firm, you can come in and, what IT teams can be like, sometimes a little bit standoffish because they think that you're there to tell them that they're doing a bad job.
Sure,
and that's the whole purpose of you being there, because you're an auditor, and that's a dirty word. And they don't want to see what the output of that report is.
That's fair. So that is true. Security departments often look at, like, let's say a penetration tested report, kind of like as a report card in school, right? And if you get Fs, right, mommy and daddy are going to spank you and put you in timeout for a week or two. I think that not only the security teams or security departments, but also the organizational or department heads need to take into account that identifying vulnerabilities, although kind of sucks, it's also kind of a good thing, right? Because you didn't miss it. Now, where the problem comes in is, when a security team is not pushed or reinforced to get patches done or fixes to whatever vulnerabilities existed during test 1. If test 2 comes around and those aren't done, I mean, you should be scared of the report, because if you're not fixing that, you're not doing your job, right? So that's incredibly important.
Exactly. So I'll throw my 2 cents in.
Sure.
I think one of the things I've had the most success doing in getting IT teams on board, right, is taking them on an educational journey.
Oh, okay.
So using it as an opportunity to help explain to them why what you're doing is important, and that you're not necessarily there to make them look bad, get them in trouble, or anything like that, because you don't want cybersecurity to be a roadblock or a blocker in the business. You want cybersecurity to be a business enabler, right? Because the more secure you are, the better your business is going to operate, the more your customers and clients are going to trust you.
Yeah.
Now, if you also use it as an opportunity to take the IT team on a journey with you, right? So maybe include them in some of the activities you're doing for the pen test, right? Because not a lot of IT people get the opportunity to see that side of cybersecurity. A lot of people want to, and a lot of IT people even want to break into cybersecurity. They just don't have that particular exposure. So if you talk to them about the really cool stuff that you're doing, they're usually nerds like us. So you talk to them about a lot of the cool stuff you're doing, share it with them, take them on the journey with them. Don't just surprise them with a big flashy, burgundy or red report at the end of the day, or at the end of, 3 weeks down the track. Take them on the journey so they know what's coming down the pipeline. Give them an opportunity to understand what the vulnerabilities are and to, even remediate them as you go along. Help educate them on that, and even let them have a play with your tools while they're doing it.
Sure. You know what? I'm actually, I'm glad you said that. So a lot of clients that I've had in the past, regardless of company that I worked for, if the security team has a point of contact that is communicating with a penetration tester throughout the entire test, that's a huge plus for me, right? And when we do that, it actually offers me the ability to say, hey, I identified this, right? And, is that something that you've seen in the past? And then if they don't understand exactly what that is or how to fix it, that offers me the opportunity to walk them through, what the vulnerability is, person to person, right? Not with the department head, but with that specific individual who's leading that security department. And when we come down to the day where we walk the entire organizational team through the penetration test report, those individuals already have answers to the questions, like, what are we doing about this? Okay, well, now I know because I walked through it with the penetration tester. So communication
100%.
is everything.
100%. And quite often as well, for your engagement to close out smoothly, you need those guys on side.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Alex, final question for the day, final question for the podcast. Does physical security belong in the cybersecurity realm and or team?
Whoa, yes. Holy crap, yes. Please Please, please, please do not disregard physical security. Are you kidding? Okay, so physical security, what is it? It's everything from sight, right? When I can see your company that you work for, all the way to what you would call the citadel. So yes, cameras, A plus, right? Personnel trained at the desk, A plus, absolutely. Because the most successful avenue of approach to attacking an organization is an internal physical threat, right? Or we could call it social engineering. And social engineering isn't just an email phish, okay? And it's not just a phone call vish. Social engineering, the most successful avenue that I have found working with clients is walking into the building and working magic with personality. It's going to be the person that you never thought would be that person, right? Never thought would be the attacker. You're going to let them walk in. They're going to identify their objective. They're going to hit their objective, and they're going to walk away. You'll never know, but now they have full unadulterated access to your entire system. So everything you say, everything you do is seen, heard, and identified on their computer screen. Yes. Chris, yes. Whoever you are out there, abso-freaking-lutely. Physical security, go.
I have
yes.
I have two examples of how those two things essentially cross over. Now, if we go back to before the buzzword of cybersecurity, when it was called information security, right? That encompasses a lot more than just, your computer, your laptop, those types of things, right?
Sure.
So I'll give you two examples of physical security impacting information, or as we call it, cybersecurity now. There was a company here, very large company, say that they are a laptop manufacturer, but they also provide, professional services and managed services, very large global company. Now, I used to work in the same building as this company, and one day they had a pallet of laptops delivered, and you're talking like 150 laptops, right? Somebody walked into the building wearing a high-vis vest, picked up that pallet on, like one of the little pallet trailers, walked it out of the building, loaded a van, and drove off. That person in the high-vis vest did not work for that company. They just had to write off those 150 laptops because they never recovered them.
Wow. That's so common, though.
Yeah, well, the important thing to note about that is those laptops weren't coming from just the manufacturer or from the factory. Those laptops were coming from IT, so they had already been built with the operating environment and everything that goes with that, right? So now you're talking physical security impacting information and cybersecurity, right?
Yep. That's an awesome example.
Well, stay tuned for this one because I have a better one. I was engaged to do essentially a simulated attack exercise on an organization a few years ago now. Now, a lot of people might remember the Ariana Grande concert that was blown up, from a terrorist perspective in Manchester, right? Okay. Yeah. Now, the organization that engaged me was a similar entertainment venue that would host concerts and things like that. Now, I did some initial research and I found on their website that they had the classic /uploads that you could just publicly access and get a whole bunch of documents. No. Now, what you could get from that was amazing because they had pretty much all of the RFPs and RFQs that had been released to any vendor sitting there, right? But what was also interesting about it that you wouldn't normally consider a vulnerability was the building layout and the building maps, including the emergency exits and the, evacuation points and everything like that, and the gathering points when people evacuate in the essence of a fire or something like that, right?
Sure.
Now, that was part one. I had all these documents. Part of that, I also got a whole bunch of information about them around tenders that they'd used for people that built doors and security cameras. So I knew all of these physical controls that they had in place, the vendors that had made those. And then you can look up those vendors and find out how they do that, what their products are. You can see where I'm going. There's a lot of information, right? You can build this profile, right? I then went to that organization wearing a high-vis vest. I walked in, past security. Nobody checked me. Nobody asked me anything. I popped off a wall panel to pretend that I was doing some maintenance, and I could plug straight into the network with a network cable.
Money.
Once I had access to that, that was pretty much game over, because I was able to then see the security cameras that I already knew existed, the smart doors that I already knew existed, even the TV screens that that they put into the stadium when they're playing the concert and everything like that. I had access to all of these things, right?
Jesus.
Now, there was a little bit more. Like, I was even able to convince the receptionist in a different building that I was starting work there that day. All the while, she gave me a lot of information just about her personal life, the kids' names, pets' names, where she lives, first street, where she grew up, all the things. There was enough for me to create a password list. The attack on her was a lot easier because her password was literally her favorite artist that she had a photo behind her desk with, 123. Now, that was a completely different attack path. Anyway, if I went back to everything and I put it all in the report and I mapped it out and I showed how I was able to get, domain admin, and I even screenshotted, the IT manager's desktop because he had all of the passwords for the organization in his Outlook notes. So I showed all of this to the CEO of that organization to try and show him how physical security led me here.
Sure.
And he said to me, but realistically, though, what's that risk? Like, you got access to some passwords and everything like that. Now, I go back to the Ariana Grande concept or the Ariana Grande incident, right? Because when I framed it to him in this way, which was, what you need to understand is, before I even entered site, I had your evacuation procedures. I had your evacuation points. I had all of their emergency exits. I knew exactly where everybody was going to be. And then I entered site. I had access to potentially stop the concert or any show that was in play by turning off all of the monitors and everything like that, and turning off all of the sound and everything to make that a thing. I had access to trigger off alarms. I had access to turn off the security cameras. And I also had access to lock all of the doors except the ones that I wanted to remain unlocked, meaning that I could have pushed everybody out of one single door. And I could have pushed, which means that I would have pushed them all to one single evacuation point.
Sure.
Which then, if you wanted to achieve the same thing that happened at that concert, you did, but more catastrophically.
Yep. Just killed
that
everybody.
Is a significant example of how a lack of physical security will lead to an information security or cybersecurity compromise, but then also trigger public safety.
Physical threat. Yep. It's kind of like Stuxnet. I know we didn't discuss it during our DoD talk with Redfire, but that unit wasn't on the net, so it would have had to have been an internal threat. So
but I mean, like, the important thing is like, it should sit in that realm, and because we've detracted away from information security, we're now looking at cybersecurity. So that physical security component gets pushed to people like receptionists or office managers or things like that, and people who don't actually understand it, but it's still its own kind of specialty field that needs special considerations. And
absolutely,
you being from the military, Alex, would understand that too. And I think that it's something that does get overlooked. And I mean, fundamentally, it's something that should 100% sit with a CISO. Because a CISO isn't a chief cybersecurity officer, they're a chief information security officer. They 100% should have physical security under their remit.
Absolutely. Totally agree. That was a good question, dude. That was a good question.
All right, and that brings us to the end of episode 5 of the Blackbox Diaries in our season 1 and inaugural season of our podcast. So special thanks to my co-host Alex, obviously always does a fantastic job. Special thanks to everybody who sent in questions. There were some absolute bangers this week. And obviously a special thanks to Redfire for joining us and talking us through his OSCP journey and some of the threats facing the United States and the world currently. It has occurred to us, and we have talked about it. There are a lot of people watching, but there is significantly less subscribers. So it would be really mean a lot to us if you could click subscribe, possibly even like the video if you do, and possibly comment. And as always, if you have any community questions, if you have anything you want us to discuss, or if you want us to include anything in the podcast, we're always open to feedback. Please reach out to us on any of our social media or comment down below. And on that note, we will see you next week.
Absolutely. Bye.